The worship team leading us today, we thank you that you're here. Please be seated. Thank you for joining us in worship. I told you we're getting invaded by the wonderful group of folks from Guam. We want to welcome Marilyn's sisters here today. Millie, am I right? Glad to have you here today. We'll take everyone that will come, and thanks for joining us in worship today. We're loving having your sister here, and I know you go back next week, but thank you for being with us. Well, how did you do this week? I'm trying not to use the word lucky. Yeah, you went in Walmart and like, oh, I'm lucky. Oops, I better not. It's going to take a while to figure out how to do it. We had a sermon last week on God or chance, and we were talking about how in the book of Samuel, 1 Samuel chapter 6, they try to prove whether God did it or chance did it. And the truth of the matter is we sometimes say chance is a possibility or a probability. But chance is nothing. Chance can do nothing. There is no such thing as luck. So I'm challenging you to challenge each other not to use the word lucky. How many of you did better using it less last week? John, I need a little bit more up here. How many did a little bit better? Felt like you did a little better? Yeah, that's good. I had to work on it too, but it's a habit that we grow up with. Well, let me ask you this. What do you think the chances were that your search committee would recommend to this church? By the way, this is Family Church Sunday. Jen, are there things to hand out for anybody, or is it just kind of, listen to me? Well, we're going to have a kind of interesting time together, and I'll call your name, Logan, sometime along the line. Okay, so here we go. We're talking about the new pastor who's coming, whose name is Pastor Kidd. And he's coming with 5 children. And I wanted to ask you this question. What are the chances that the search committee would find a name of a pastor in England, that he would come here, you would vote as a church with no one voting against for him to be the pastor of this church? You know, did chance cause that? Absolutely not. The possibilities are almost zero, slim to none. The probabilities even less. But chance did not make that happen. And I want to say to you, I believe God's in it. I want to say to you as a church, it's going to demand more from you than if you were calling somebody who just grew up in Capolay or somewhere like that. But I think we also saw the potential of someone like that coming to lead us. Now, as they sit in England waiting for their visa, just to get that stamp at the embassy, and we think it's going to be at least by the end of this next month, which is tomorrow, starts tomorrow. I want you to be praying for them that they could get a visa maybe a little bit earlier at the London embassy. Otherwise, they're going to go to Belfast. But as you think about all there is to help them get acclimated to what's going to be a wonderful ministry here, I want to talk to you today about thinking about it as if it was investing for eternity. Think about that. You and I, little old human beings, we have at the most so many years on this earth. We get to invest in eternity that goes on forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And what we believe is that with their coming and his coming to lead us, one of the things that attracted you as a church to him, I believe, is that he will help you invest in eternity in a way that will change this island and your community and this church for the glory of God. He's coming from a church much bigger than this church. And we're excited about his coming. So we're going to talk today about investing for eternity. And we're going to talk about how we can invest our time, our talents, our energies, and how we can help make friends for eternity. Think with me about that. Have you ever made a friend who's going to welcome you when you get to heaven? We have a church that has folks that do that. And I'm going to ask Brother Pat if he'll come up here. Brother Pat has a story that he's not asked to tell. I've asked him to tell it. It's the story about him winning a friend to become a follower of Jesus Christ. So we're going to kind of dialogue up here, and this is good for you as a family to listen to this and get yourself lots of stuff there. So Brother Pat, a couple of months back, not actually a couple of months back, a little while back, you told me the story of winning one of your friends to Christ. Now, you have changed jobs since then, but tell us about the time you were 10 stories high, is that right?
So I used to work on scaffolding for a construction society. We had a large turnover of personnel, so I always got the opportunity to meet different people from different areas. And this person was from the Philippines. He had a hard time understanding English. His language was Filipino. So they put him with me for a couple of months, and I had a hard time communicating English. But
we have translators here, but they don't want to climb 10 stories high.
I always knew that I would reach it one day. So his English to me was really small, but as days went on, I started witnessing, started telling him about Christ, and started mentioning, the gospel, John 3:16, Romans 3:23, 6:23. Went through the whole Romans road, and he never caught on until one day that we were struggling, and he was kind of frustrated. You could tell he was frustrated in the workload and just the daily work struggle, yeah. And he was pretty frustrated. So I told him, there's more than just work. And I started telling him that Christ can change your life.
And one day you were 10 feet up, 10 stories high, and you had to go down and talk to management about something. And you said to him, you'll be okay. Just trust yourself up here. Tell that story. That's kind of interesting that you'd leave someone 10 stories high. That's a lot higher than I want to be.
He just kept on telling me he's scared working alone by himself. So I told him, don't worry. Sorry.
That's all right. So you told him just to trust while he was up there. It was a good lesson in trust. You left him up there, didn't you?
Trust Christ and he'll get you by. He still couldn't understand.
So then a sense of urgency came into your life because you were applying for a job with the federal government, and by God's grace, that came into your life. So you knew you had limited time. So how did that urgency build in your life as you shared with your friend?
So I was looking forward of leaving the job because I was all excited of working for the federal one. I just knew that I would have to reach him before I leave. So I told him, if we die one day, do you know where you're going? And he said no. So I told him that he can know today if we fall off, something happened, you die, where you going? He said, I don't know. So I told him that you can know right here, right now. And I got the opportunity to lead him to the Lord.
In a parking lot?
In the parking lot. In the middle of the workday, in the middle of the hustle and bustle and frustration and everything that goes on with construction. But that was my last day with him.
Wow.
And I left.
Your very last day.
Till today, I still try to keep in contact, try to reach him to bring him to church.
And as you were with him that day in the parking lot, he said a prayer confessing Christ as his Savior and Lord.
Yeah, I got the opportunity to lead him through the Romans road. And, I told him that if you confess with your mouth, believe in your heart, that God will save you. If you do this, say the sinner's prayer with me, if you want to. And I had the opportunity to lead him, and he got saved.
That's what investing in eternity is about. Brother Pat, we love you. Thanks for sharing that. Thanks for being that example to us. Not just you, but your whole family. You know what? That was the last day he had with that gentleman. So let me ask you this. How many friends have you had the opportunity to win to Christ? You say, well, none, but there's another way of thinking about that. I'm also going to tell you that as you participate in a church fellowship like this, and you hear Pat's testimony, you kind of have a part of that. You know why? If Pat didn't have a place where he could come and worship and hear preaching and be encouraged by you, when he's out there 10 stories high with this guy and knows he needs to share Christ, he wouldn't be encouraged. So we had a part in that testimony. He invested in eternity. He actually led this guy to Christ, but we had a part of that. So Pat, in some way, that's our testimony. And you guys have been here since the very beginning of this church, and you still serve so faithfully. And I think you understand what it means to invest for eternity. We're going to go to Luke chapter 16, and we're going to be in verses 1 through 13. This is one of the craziest stories that Jesus ever told. I love to tell stories. I love to make up stories. My grandson's back there, Corbin. We love to pretend stories and just make silly stories. This one is a crazy story that's only found in Luke's gospel. Maybe I shouldn't call it crazy. I don't mean to be disrespectful to our Lord and Savior, but it's so interesting because Jesus told stories that were called parables. And in this parable, it turns out totally different from what you would ever expect. And I want you to follow with me as I'm reading from chapter 16 of Luke's Gospel. I'm just going to read it and explain as we go through. But if you got it, say, I got it. Hey, got it there? Here we go. Jesus told his disciples, and there was probably a crowd there as well, but it was aimed at those that were following him. It's now coming towards the end of his ministry. There was a rich man whose manager, so he was rich enough to have a guy working for him to take care of everything he had. His manager was accused of wasting his possessions. In those days, rich people would have a financial manager, a steward, somebody who worked for him. He had to take care of business. He didn't own it, but he had to use it for his master. And this guy, we call him the dishonest manager. Sometimes he's called the unjust steward because he was taking advantage of his employer. Jesus doesn't say in the story exactly what he did. Maybe he was making bad investments. Maybe he was being sloppy about his work, keeping records. Perhaps he was stealing. But he was treating his owner's possessions as if he didn't care. So the master in verse 2 called him in and asked him, "What is this I hear about you?" Word had got back to this rich man that the steward, the manager, was not doing well, was wasting his money, was stealing or whatever he was doing. And the manager said, "You're fired." No, he said, "Give an account of your management, get all the books in order so we know what's happening. And because you cannot manage any longer, you're fired. Give an account of your management because you cannot manage any longer." So here's where the twist begins. Don't you love a story with a twist? The manager said to himself, "What shall I do now? My master's taken away my job and I'm not strong enough to dig. And I'm too ashamed to get out there with a tin can to beg." Verse 4, "I know what I'll do. So that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. I'd better start planning now for when I lose my job. I better plan for my future. I need to make sure I have some friends." So he came up with a plan. This is why we call him the dishonest manager. Verse 5, "So he called in each of his master's debtors." I mean, he's the guy in charge of all the money. And he said to the first one, "How much do you owe?" Verse 6, 800 gallons of olive oil. Well, that's still pretty pricey. In those days, they say that was worth about 3 years' wages. I mean, this guy owes a lot of money. The manager said to him, "Oh, take your bill quickly, sit down quickly, and make it 400. In other words, all you have to pay is 50 cents on the dollar. Wow. You can imagine the situation. The guy's like, whoa, you really mean that? I don't have to pay it all back? No, just half is fine. And as the guy is leaving, I'm adding to the story, imagining him saying, "Okay, well, thanks for helping me. If you ever need something, just call me." He was making friends for his future. Then look at the next guy comes in verse 7. He asked him, how much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat. That's 30 tons of wheat. That's a lot. He told him, take your bill and make it 800. This is now 80 cents on the dollar. So this shrewd, unjust, dishonest manager goes through all the debtors and he makes a deal with them so that when his job ends, he's going to have friends who owe him something, because he didn't want to be out on the street without any friends. You say, wait a minute, is it really in the Bible? Is my phone working right today? Is this something that just ended up here? This is the craziest story. I mean, if it happened today, it would be on the front page of the paper here in Honolulu. It would be on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. I mean, it's going to be everywhere. And you're saying to yourself, this guy should go to jail for that. But I told you, the parable doesn't go as planned. It takes a twist. Look at the twist in verse 8. The master, instead of saying, stop that, commended the dishonest manager because he acted shrewdly. Shrewd means prudently, planned ahead. He was ripping off his master, but he was also clever. He was also planning for the future. And everybody's going to stop Jesus. This is a crazy story. It's only in Luke's gospel. But why did the rich man say, commend him? Look at the last part of the verse. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than the people of the light. If you're listening, say I'm listening. Sometimes sinners are smarter than saints when it comes to investing. Now, I'm not saying sinners can invest in heaven like you and I can, but sometimes they're smarter about planning ahead. Maybe we can take a lesson from this guy who's a bad example but gives us a good lesson today. And what we have to understand is we have limited time. You don't know how long you have. Pat said, I knew I only had a limited time with this friend. And so we need to plan carefully and use what God has given us for the future. We need not to be dishonest like this guy, but we need to learn a lesson about his investing in the future, his planning ahead. And here's the lesson from the parable. It's coming up in Luke 16 and verse 9. This makes it all make sense. Read it with me if you will. I tell you, when Jesus says that, he really says, listen up. Are you listening? I tell you, please read it with me. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you'll be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Now, every Bible translation does this one a little different. I'm using NIV this morning. Jesus is saying, listen up. I'm telling you, use worldly wealth. He's talking primarily about money, but I wanted to apply it further to your time, your talents, your investment in serving God, so that when it's gone, you know when your money will be gone? Hopefully not before you're gone, but when you're gone, it's all gone. Nobody takes any money, cars, houses. There are no U-Hauls in heaven or at funerals. I grew up in Africa, and it's really funny. When they buried somebody, they'd bury all their furniture with them. It was just kind of the custom with the folks that I grew up around. Kind of weird because it left the family without any furniture. And I'm going, what? But you know what happened to that furniture? It didn't go anywhere. Nobody leaves this world with anything. Naked we came into the world, naked we go out of the world. The only thing that we take with us is what we invest in eternity. And so the story is an unusual one, but Jesus says, use your worldly wealth. If I can say money, time, gifts, and abilities, your energies and your opportunities to gain friends for yourself, so that when you're gone, you'll have some folks that welcome you into the eternal dwellings, and here that's heaven. Who's waiting to welcome you into heaven? Who have you invested in for eternity? Pat, I believe, and I didn't give that guy's name, that guy will welcome you into heaven if he gets there first. If not, you'll welcome him. That's not the first guy you've led to Christ. It's one of your gifts. You see, all these treasures, times, and talents, they don't last forever. So while we have opportunity, let's invest in making friends in heaven. And I want to talk to you very practically this morning about how we can do this. If you have the New Living Translation, and Greg, I know you like this version, and I do too. It says it well. It says, here's the lesson from the parable. Use your worldly resources, everything you've got, to benefit others and make friends. Then when your possessions are gone and you're gone with them, they will welcome you to an eternal home. Time is limited. Life is brief. You have abilities, you have a tongue, you have time, you have talents, and you have stuff. And they're all tools that God has given you to invest in making friends in heaven. We're facing a deadline. This dishonest manager was facing a deadline. You've got an opportunity to talk to some people. I remember studying with a guy in a business degree all through the degree, and for 3 years I knew I needed to witness to him. And finally, as we came to the last week of the last semester, I sat down in his house with Geoff, and he spelled it the same way as I spelt my name. And when I shared with him how to be saved, you know what his first question was? If this is so important to you, why did you wait so long to tell me? And you may have friends. All of us have friends who are not saved, and they may be wondering, what's the difference in your life? I wonder why they don't tell me. And maybe this week you're going to have an opportunity to invest in making friends in heaven. So I want to give you some very practical ways in which I believe we do it here at Aloha Nani Church. We're going to welcome and help the kid family become a part of the community and the culture here. We have an opportunity to invest in them as they come here to help us invest in making friends in heaven. Let me tell you how they're coming. They're coming with 7 suitcases. We have an arrival team, and if you want to be a part of that, Victor and Lasagna kind of are leading it. But all of us are getting involved in different ways. There's a donation list that now is 3 pages long, and if you want to give something to them or have something that you want to go out and buy or you're not using, you can go in that Google Doc and add it. I've got a copy here. If you're not on it, just write your name on a slip of paper. Make sure you've got a Gmail address and you get in there. But we're going to have to help them find a house. We're going to help them find a car. We're going to help them open bank accounts. We're going to help them know their way around. One small matter, and we got Jim to help them with this. Jim, you're going to have to help them drive on the correct side of the road, okay? Because they've done it before, and they've got a lot of experience. But, you know, that's kind of a fun thing that we want to talk about. But they're giving it all up to make an investment in this island to make friends in heaven. And as we help them, we talked last week about trying to find a van for them. Somebody in the back is like, well, I know someone who's selling a van. Willie's like, I'll help them find a van. Greg is like, I can fix the van. Someone else is like, and before I know it, and I'm not going to get into more details, but there's like the possibility of a van at a price that's right within budget. And when they ask you to help them, could you help us with this? Don't think of it as an inconvenience. Think of it as an opportunity to invest in making friends in heaven. And that's how I like to think about church. Every time I give my tithe, every time I serve, I'm making an investment in giving people an opportunity to become our friends in heaven. And Pat, that story has stuck in my mind. It will continue to stick in my mind. I watch Sunday morning and I look out there and I see our super church folks or our children's church people leading. And Jen, thank you for leading that. And it's sometimes it's like, wow, how do you ever keep all this going? Why do we do it? Because we're investing in making friends in heaven. I see the Andersons doing the youth ministry. Why would they get their house ready, or Debbie get the house ready for the women's Bible study, or Aaron? And it's because we believe in investing in making friends for heaven. Well, nobody got saved at the women's Bible study last Monday, but someone was strengthened in her faith so that she could be a better and stronger maker of friends for Christ. I watch on Sunday morning, and I have to say, if we ever had a model servant, it would be Hugh. And he don't want me to call his name, but I mean, running around, taking things down, moving things. We praise God for the greeter team that Margaret leads. You guys are out there welcoming, saying hi. Why do you stand there every Sunday morning? Because you understand that you're investing in making friends in heaven. You're investing for eternity. Men's events, Robert. I watch these guys sit at the back and they put up the sound system, and I'm like, why do you do it every week? Why do you come in and spend all this time setting up? Because they realize that ultimately without this we couldn't share and worship and help people find the way, the truth, and the life, Jesus Christ, and they're investing in eternity. The worship team, Wilder, thank you for leading that, and all those who practice every week and get ready for that. And there's an unsung hero back there whose name is Willie, who spends about 2 hours on Saturday night getting ready with all these slides, and if they don't work, then we're in trouble. But I want you to see your participation in giving, in serving, in helping as an investment in making friends in heaven. See, this church couldn't exist through people just tipping. Now, that's a dangerous thing to say because some of you tip more than 10%. But we want you at least to tithe. And then as you tithe, so the ministry is supported, and you go ahead and give over that as God blesses in tithes and offerings. And some of you are working up to that, and that's where you want to get to. And once you get there, you don't ever want to stop because you know that you have more to make ends meet if you give the first 10 to God than if you try to keep it all. And then we just want to thank you for allowing us to invest with you at this church for the last few months. Wednesday night, we got to help make friends in heaven because of what you have done through the years. And I have permission from this young couple to share this. They work shifts, and their names are Kyle and Kim Whittington. So their grandparents went to this church, is that right, Joe? Yeah, Bobby and David. So somewhere along the line, you sowed into this couple. They came Easter last year. They came Easter this year. I gave the invitation and I said, does anybody want to be baptized? And Kim raised a hand. And then when I talked to them afterwards, and you saw me talking over here, Kyle said, if I hadn't been holding the baby, I would have raised my hand. And I love to talk about baptism. And Hannah, we're looking forward to your baptism in June when your hubby's back. And I'm so excited about baptisms. Because if I can tell someone what baptism means, I can explain how to be saved. So we get a call on Wednesday night. We're just at the farmers' the nighttime market. And we say, we'll be there as soon as I get my milk tea. And we get it and we head out. And their house is spotless. They're waiting for us. We discover that Kim's been in hospital. She's 5 months pregnant, and she's, all sorts of things that she just needs our prayers for her health. There's this new baby coming. But we sit down and we start to talk, and I say, Carla, was there ever a time in your life that you gave your heart to Christ? And I asked it in different ways, but finally he tells me that when he was 13 or 14, he went to a camp. Someone invested in his life, and he gave his heart to Christ, but he never got saved. Never got baptized. So now he wants to be baptized. And then we share with Kim, and Kim talks about going to church, but says, I just have never done this. And so we had the privilege of investing in their lives at their table there on your behalf, because you've invested in us. And Kim prayed a beautiful prayer. I just say, Kim, why don't you just tell God what you're thinking? She says, Lord, I'm sorry for my sins. And I believe you can forgive me. You died on the cross for my sins. And then I prompted just a little bit, but it was a beautiful prayer. As in tears, she gave her heart to Jesus Christ. So I want you to pray for Kyle and Kim. And I asked them if I could share the story today. And he's working nights tonight. But they told me they went out and bought a Bible. And they've got sticky notes. And they want us to come around and this week help them into the Bible study. And I gave them got questions. But Pat, I wanted to add that to that story because you were a part of the Whittingtons on Wednesday night. Just like we were with you as we were investing in eternity together. And I want you to see the coming of your new pastor in terms of helping us invest in making friends in heaven. And Jesus says not only that, but we need to be trustworthy. Look at verse 10. For whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with very much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So I remember as a kid seeing this verse and I'm going, wow, God, would you trust me with a lot? And then I'm like, no, wait a minute, it doesn't work that way. It's, let's see the slide, it's trust in little is what leads you to be able to be trusted in much. We'd like to be trusted with much so that we can skip the little. Lord, if I made another $100,000 a year, I would tithe every dime that I should. What I have discovered with people, the richer they get, the less they tithe. And sometimes, if you look back when you only were making 20,000, you were probably more generous maybe than now you're making more. I don't know what you make and I don't need to. But the little here, if you look at this verse carefully, you know what the little is? The little is money. The much is much more than money. It is spiritual riches. Look at verse 11. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who's going to trust you with true riches, spiritual responsibility, opportunities that impact eternity? It's not little becomes much. It's that the little money, when we're trustworthy, becomes something that God says, now I'll trust you with other responsibilities. It's about trusting and it's about testing. I love Malachi 3:10. I've lived by it, and I will live by it, and a lot of you live by it. Bring the full tithe into the storehouse. Let's say it together. Bring the full tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house, and thereby put me to the test, says the Lord of hosts, if I will not open the windows of heaven for you and pour down for you a blessing until there is no more need. And sometimes we talk about tithes and offerings. Do you remember that phrase? Let's put that up, Matt. And I want to just tell you something I discovered in my church. I never looked at what people gave. I don't think a pastor should. But I did find this, that every time we had a special offering for something, you know who had enough money to give? The people that tithed. I always thought, well, maybe we have the special offering, and then the person that never gives anything is going to give to the offering. Well, they give maybe just a little bit. But the ones who gave regularly and tithed were the ones that gave to the special offerings. And I get to say this before Pastor Jamie comes, that in order to see his ministry flourish and our church to continue the way it is, you have to continue to be faithful and trustworthy with the little, with your tithing and your offerings, so that you can see God trust you with greater spiritual riches. And then the third thing in this parable, and this is what Jesus says, you only can serve one master. Verse 13, no servant can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Money is a great tool, but it's a terrible master. And I find that until a Christ follower learns to tithe, money is a master instead of a tool in their hands. And the parallel of the story is actually in Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21, where it says, do not lay up for yourselves treasure on earth, where moth and rust destroy and thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart is also. And right after that, Jesus in Sermon on the Mount says, no one can serve two masters. That's verse 24. So it's a parable. So here's my last question. Guess what? Guess what? Guess what, Corbin? He said it. Will there be friends waiting to thank you in heaven? Because you shared like Pat did, or because you invested in the church where God placed you at this point in time. Wendy's out there investing her time, and you've done it, Lisa and Hannah, and so many of you in children, in nursery. You know, I'm going to leave someone out, so forgive me. But you know what I'm getting to. Set up, Victor, thank you for that team that you lead. And I had a very, very good, strong deacon, leader, friend, and the church that we planted in Georgia die the week after my mom did. He was 71 years old, rode horses every day, threw up his saddle up. Tom was the kind of guy that you thought would last till he was 100. Whenever I finished preaching, he'd be at the door and he'd say, thank you for that message, Geoff. We went to Israel together. We did a whole bunch of things. Every time we had something happening, Tom and Tony would be at our church. Never worried about their tithing, never worried about their attendance. Just reliable, always investing in eternity, and they did it by always being there. He led he was our treasurer at one point. She led women's ministry. Just those kind of good, solid people. And to our shock and dismay, Tom had a bad feeling at lunch one day, and by 5 o'clock in the afternoon, he was called home. But I've been thinking this week about all the people that welcomed Tom into heaven through all the ways in which he invested in churches that he was a part of. I don't think he had the gift that you have, Pat. But he's tried to. But he did it by investing in the body of Christ wherever he was. So I miss him. Today's his wife's birthday. And I want to say to myself, as I said to you, be wise. Be about investing in eternity more than you invest in this world, because this world doesn't last forever. And I want to say, be trustworthy. That little is of the money, and then God will trust you with greater spiritual riches. And be loyal. Serve one master, don't serve two. And today, I have a tract here that if you have a friend that you want to share Christ with this week, I'd like to share this with you. You recognize this, Hannah? I shared this with Kyle and with Kim the other night. Wish I had one for all. Debbie's getting on to me. She said you should have one for everybody here today. But if you have a friend you want to witness to this week, I challenge you to come and take this, and I'll lead you through how to share it this week. So let's pray together.